There is a person that is on the board who's been sending out these poison pen emails that are poisoning the water that we have to drink from.
Whether it's jeopardizing an individual's livelihood, libeling and slandering the organization, demeaning it, driving away donors, indeed coming up with statements that are actionable, definitely prima facie case of defamation here.
The notion that a member of this board needs training to know not to be racist, not to malign people's characters, not to talk about the staff in a disrespectful and obnoxious way.
The LSB disapproves of and disassociates itself from the aforesaid public statements by board member Steve Brown.
You say you're in control, you say you're right. You say too much, too loud, too long. You wanna steal the show, steal everything in sight. You would sing, but you have no song. You have no clue where you belong. Think guns and money make you strong. Right here and now, and when you're gone, we will sing our song. We will sing our song. We will sing our song. Don't yell at me, don't interrupt me.
Welcome to another edition of the Battle for Progressive Media. I'm today's host, John Riley. I'm a producer with Out FM, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender show on listener-supported, non-commercial WBAI New York, broadcasting at 99.5 on the FM dial and at www.wbai.org. WBAI is a part of the 5-station Progressive Pacifica Radio Network, which has 90 affiliates nationwide. The program that you are watching is not in any way affiliated with WBAI. Pacifica has a long history as a peace and justice radio network, putting onto the airwaves hosts and guests that have challenged this country's war machine, its racial injustice, and denial of workers' rights. Pacifica did extensive coverage of the civil rights movement, the free speech movement, the Black Power, gay, and women's liberation movements, to name a few, right up to the present day. It has been a target of government repression on several occasions. KPFT in Houston was twice bombed off the air by the Ku Klux Klan. The scenes you just saw were from a March 2006 meeting of the elected WBAI local station board, at which board members passed a resolution to publicly disassociate themselves from an array of what they labeled abusive, racially insensitive statements widely circulated in mass emails by board member Steve Brown, who is running for re-election this fall. The board majority viewed these statements as damaging to the station and its personnel. We'll be discussing more of that later in the show. In our first program, we reviewed some of the recent history of the Pacifica Radio Network and WBAI. We looked at the coup period of 1999 to 2002, when upper-level management was trying to complete their plan to mainstream the network by reshaping the top governing structure, the Pacifica National Board. Before this coup period began, they had carried out smaller coups at Washington, D.C., Houston, Los Angeles, and the Berkeley stations, where mainstreaming eliminated much of the progressive activist content. The final stage was adding to the Pacifica National Board Democratic Party-connected centrists from a variety of industries, including a union-busting lawyer, a couple of real estate executives, a radio and TV broker, and a manager of the National Association of Home Builders, a group opposing disability access and environmental regulations. This group of board members moved aggressively with plans for sale of both WBAI and the Berkeley station before the plans were leaked to the public. This proved the final blow to the coup regime in Berkeley, where in 1999 there was a huge uprising of staff and listeners that were successful in gaining back partial control of the station. Then, when the mainstreaming managers turned their sights on WBAI, they ran into even more disastrous trouble. Their December 2000 takeover of WBAI instantly dubbed the Christmas coup by listeners, involved the firing of WBAI General Manager Valerie Van Eisler, popular host and program director Bernard White, senior producer Sharon Louise Harper, and over the months that followed, dozens of other producers and hosts. What the mainstreamers didn't count on, however, was the mobilization of a strong listener and producer movement which fought together with their counterparts at other Pacifica stations to regain control not just of WBAI, but the entire network. Using a combination of direct action, street protest, and a financial boycott, as well as lawsuits, the Listener-Producer Alliance won back control of the network, and a new, progressive Pacifica National Board was inaugurated in December 2001. Then began an effort to pull the network together with new management, new bylaws, and a new spirit of involvement. But the road to recovery has been rough. A bitter battle over the new bylaws left Pacifica without any affirmative action measures for including women and people of color on its local and national governing boards, which for the first time were to be mandated to be elected by listener subscribers and staff, with listeners granted large majorities of the seats. Today, divisions within the Pacifica Radio Network remain sharp. Tensions within the network have been accentuated as WBAI has been hard hit by the devastating aftermath of the downturn in the New York economy following the 9/11 attacks and the general decline in listener support of public radio. The result has been staff layoffs at an already understaffed station. Meanwhile, several local board members elected on the Listprog slate who had opposed the inclusion of affirmative action in the Pacifica bylaws have advocated a decrease in the amount of programming produced by independent Black community activists and the addition of conservative hosts to the schedule. They've also called for the firing of program director Bernard White, claiming that his programming policies are responsible for the decline in listener support, despite lack of evidence for this theory. Later this month, support for various positions will be put to the test as WBAI undergoes its third round of listener and staff elections for representatives on the local station board. Meanwhile, board members from the same group have supported recent efforts by Greg Guma, the new executive director of the parent Pacifica Foundation based in Berkeley, to impose special rules limiting WBAI's autonomy in making programming changes. Seen as some as an attempt to undercut the role of program director Bernard White and the station's program council, a body created by a union contract with a staff of both paid and unpaid producers for the purpose of advising on programming decisions. In this program, we'll profile a key figure at WBAI Radio, Bernard White, the program director since 2000. White has been a strong advocate for Black community empowerment, bringing diverse voices from the African diaspora to the air, as well as adding shows that meet the diverse needs of the New York area, including programs on prison issues, the assault on civil liberties, women's issues, the environment, the politics of Haiti, and Latin American and Latino issues, including a Spanish-language public affairs program. Then we'll also look at the positions of one of White's harshest critics, local station board member Steve Brown. Amy Goodman, former co-host with White on WBAI's morning show called Wake Up Call, talks about her experience with White as co-host. Goodman went on from that program to become co-host with Daily News columnist Juan Gonzalez of Pacifica Radio's Democracy Now!, a hard-hitting news and international public affairs program now broadcast weekdays on 500 radio and TV stations around the country.
We really hadn't worked much before together. I had known him because of his incredible work every Martin Luther King Day when you'd see him trundling down the hallways of the old WBAI with hundreds of the LPs, carrying them and the tapes falling out of his pockets and his bag. No matter whether he lived in New York or whether he lived in Richmond, he was committed to bringing out the words that were not so often heard of Dr. Martin Luther King, not the most famous speeches, but the speeches, the conversations, the discussions about Dr. King that so enrich our lives on WBAI that Bernard has really made possible for the last 20 years. Bernard's a teacher, and he always has been. It hasn't changed being a broadcaster, a journalist. That is what he is first and foremost. He has taught me so much, so many days of so many months of so many years, as he has so many people, and also made me laugh and made me cry. Bernard and I talk about the magic moments we shared together over the years of Wake Up Call, like the time with Maurice Bickham, the remarkable man who spent decades in prison in Angola, the prison named for the country where the men had been brought enslaved in this country, the plantation prison in Louisiana, 5,000 prisoners held there. Maurice had been there for decades. He had been arrested and imprisoned, given the death penalty for, then Louisiana had thrown out the death penalty, and so he was no longer on death row, but he was there, then back on death row, but still there, for killing 2 sheriff's deputies who come to his home in the middle of the night in their pajamas, members of the Klan who had tried to kill him, and in self-defense he had shot out. And Bernard was relentless. It wasn't just one program. It was talking to people about Maurice, and then finally getting Maurice on the phone, and then getting Maurice and his daughter and his granddaughter and all on the telephone as people called in from all over the country saying they were crying as they listened. And finally the day, it was Martin Luther King's Day on WBAI, that Maurice Bickham came into our studio after he ultimately, from the pressure from all of you, from the WBAI audience, from Bernard and Errol working so incredibly hard, was freed. That's the power of WBAI. That's the power of Bernard White, who stays in the midst of struggle, knowing what he stands for. He always says, stay strong and pay close attention, and it is beautiful here to see everyone standing with Bernard and saying, stay strong. Thank you, Bernard.
But White's policies, and particularly his support of continuing role for programs based on a strong, independent black community focus, have earned him the enmity of some on the local WBAI station board. Board member Steve Brown wrote in an August 2005 email sent to hundreds of subscribers, hundreds of listeners, quote, "You and I and hundreds of others have all begged and pleaded with Indra Hardat, the WBAI interim station manager, to fire you-know-who. But now it is time to go a step further and actually provide Indra with a blueprint to help rebuild this station after she hopefully cleans house," close quote. Likening his idea to a Vietnam-era grassroots war crimes tribunal, Brown goes on to propose violating board rules to form an unauthorized committee to find a new program director. Brown's repeated public statements against White and other staff members at the station has led to a strong repudiation by the WBAI local station board. In a motion passed by the board in March of this last year, the board disassociated itself from many of Brown's public statements, including what the board called racist stereotypes, crudely offensive language, and unsubstantiated allegations of violent behavior by Bernard White and Errol Maitland. Calls for violence against Bernard White. Quote, "You should have been at her side whacking Bernard with a baseball bat," close quote. And a statement that Mr. White's actions are worse for WBAI than those of Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush combined, close quote.
Whereas in a series of public emails sent to many WBAI listeners over many months, WBAI local station board member Steve Brown has engaged in an unrelenting campaign of vitriolic accusations against management, staff, and listeners of WBAI that damage the credibility of the station through innuendo with no basis in fact, thereby injuring staff morale, contributing to a climate of fear and mistrust at WBAI, and undermining fundraising efforts. Therefore, be it resolved that the LSB disapproves of and disassociates itself from the aforesaid public statements by board member Steve Brown, and calls on all LSB members to desist from making statements that prejudge the performance of WBAI management personnel, indulge in personal attacks on management and staff, and undermine listener financial support for the station.
Among the numerous criticisms of Brown is his letter to general manager of a Pacifica affiliate station in Colorado called KGNU, which he put forth what the board termed a, quote, race-based analysis of KGNU's success and WBAI's failure, close quote. In the email, Brown says, quote, how much of WBAI's almost willful self-destructiveness over the past 15 to 20 years, up to and including the last 3 years during which internal strife, mistrust, nastiness, and violence and extreme interpersonal antagonism have brought the station to the brink of bankruptcy and near total meltdown, is solely and entirely due to the tensions, frictions, and politics of race. Which leads to the corollary question, how much of the success of KGNU, not counting, of course, the part that your leadership and the efforts of your staff and listeners have played, has been to an almost total absence of the tensions, frictions, and politics of race. Countries like Japan and Scandinavia that are racially homogenous have never, though they have other problems, been crippled by racially generated strife, as have the United States, Britain, and France, and lately Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, and Switzerland, which used to be racially homogenous, but now contain large, undigested populations of foreign, third world laborers, primarily people of color who have been imported to do the unpleasant work that their own citizens no longer wish to do. New York mirrors the racial diversity of U.S. society as a whole, and WBAI, if anything, magnifies that diversity. Consequently, it is no surprise that WBAI, which has always been a pressure cooker of racial mistrust, nastiness, and violence, and extreme interpersonal antagonism, has finally, and perhaps irretrievably, blown its top, close quote. Brown quotes statistics that indicate that the Boulder area where KGNU is located is 88.3% white. And then he continues, quote, as a result, KGNU does not seem to have been plagued by the racial antagonisms that for so long prevented WBAI from getting out of its own way, close quote. In closing, he writes, quote, so I ask you, could racial tension, or rather the absence of it, be one of the most important reasons for KGNU's success and WBAI's failure, close quote. The board passed the motion of disassociation from Steve Brown's statement by a vote of 10-1. Critics of Brown also point out that his many unsubstantiated assertions and factual errors undermine the confidence in the station and make it more difficult to raise funds. At that same March meeting, Program Director Bernard White said,
these emails that go all over the country and to our listenership do just that. They don't close WBAI down, but it does begin to eat into our ability to sustain ourselves. Yeah. I had my landlord come to me with an email from Stephen Brown asking me, what's this about?
WBAI programmer Mimi Rosenberg spoke out against Brown's attacks.
Whether it's characterizations about apes or towering black men that conjure up the most vulgar images that were propagated in the birth of a nation and are still rooted in our body politic, whether it's jeopardizing an individual's livelihood, libeling and slandering the organization, demeaning it, driving away donors, indeed coming up with statements that are actionable, definitely prima facie case of defamation here.
Even Patty Heffley, a former member of ListProg and still a strong ally, said,
First of all, I will say that I find Steve Brown, many of his statements to be completely insensitive, and they are rather offensive to a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons.
Heffley proposed an amendment which would add board training to the motion.
So I'm saying that we need board training. That could, some of that, there's been a lot of talk of fiduciary and all the other problems. So I think that, we've really never had board training. We had a little bit one time. And perhaps, people really understood their responsibilities. That might actually help. So that's my amendment.
The notion that a member of this board needs training to know not to be racist, not to malign people's characters, not to talk about the staff in a disrespectful and obnoxious way. I mean, it would be bad enough if it was just a matter of name-calling and high-pitched accusations, but accusations that often as not are not even based in any fact.
Steve Brown was recently highlighted in a New York Times article about a chateau owned by him, which was literally shipped from France and reassembled in the Long Island town of Brookville years before he purchased it. According to the article, the estate is worth nearly $7 million. Eddie Ellis, producer of the WBAI Prison Issues program, On the Count, characterized the long-running campaign against WBAI program director Bernard White in a 2004 forum, which also described the campaign Brown and his allies waged against the then general manager, Don Rojas, who later resigned.
We have to mobilize and energize our forces because our opposition is well organized and well financed. You know the name Steve Brown. He's put up a lot of money in terms of designing websites, printing literature, sending out mailings, and constantly putting pressure on all of the people who feel disgruntled, who have an ego need for power, and who feel threatened by the fact that this station more and more reflects the demographics of New York, the city of New York, the state of New York, and the influx and inclusion of people of color.
The following scenes are from a tribute that was held for Bernard White this summer by a media watch group called CMOTAP, short for the Committee to Eliminate Media Offensive to African People. For 20 years, the Queens, New York-based organization has been actively confronting various members of the local and national media for presenting negative portrayals of black people. Mimi Rosenberg, producer of WBAI's program Building Bridges, our community and labor report, characterizes the split at the station, saying Bernard White is the victim of racist attacks.
I woke up and I got my paper this morning, a paper. And it says, a girl wept yesterday on a Gaza beach as an errant, soft word, right? An errant Israeli shell killed 7 of the same family. And then the Israelis stopped shelling, so the 30 other Palestinians could be attended to. Pam Africa, all you folks out there, you need to know something. You need to know truth. I could talk about fishing with Bernard. I could talk about our food fest and stuff and what a gentle, lovely man he is. But I will tell you what you need to know. You better protect him. You better protect him. He's been accused of anti-Semitism because he speaks about the brutality of occupation of the Israelis. You better protect him because it's not about 200 different attitudes at our station. It's about an ideological perspective of white supremacy. Bernard is an individual, but he exists, as we all do, in the womb of history and a contextual situation. And he is in jeopardy. And he's in jeopardy as our network, as our station is, from white power, from white supremacy, because he talks about this.
Bernard White is widely respected by many in the WBAI community and is one of the station's best on-air fundraisers. At the CEMOTAP tribute, a community activist, Anthony McCall, talks about White's dedication as he presents the award.
Bernard White was a freedom fighter before he ever heard of WBAI, and certainly before he came to WBAI. When he came there, he brought that consciousness, that undying love of his people, that love that we remember Kwame Ture, that we remember Che Guevara, that we remember Amel Clark Cabral for. That's the undying love that Bernard White brought to WBAI. When he became the program director after the loss of one of our great and beloved comrades, there was very little other choice to be made. Lombe made that point earlier. I ask you to ponder very quickly, if not Bernard, who? Keep that in mind as we go forward, because he will continue to be a freedom fighter tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
That was Anthony McCall talking about WBAI Program Director Bernard White.
We have a lot of work to do at BAI. There's a lot of work to do because we're entering into a very important period, a very dangerous period, a period in which all the rules are being changed. And what was illegal at one time is now legal. People can be snatched off the street for no reason at all, and given no reason for their incarceration, and they can stay as long as the state wants them to. And historically, when those things happen, it happens to us. It happens to poor people, it happens to people of color. So we need to continue to have at WBAI the kind of leadership that recognizes that and begins to structure an organization that is going to continue to tell truth to the people regardless of what the consequences are.
Listeners who became paid members of WBAI before the September 1st, 2006 deadline will be eligible to vote in this fall's election for the local station board. For more information about the Justice and Unity campaign, go to www.justiceunity.org or call 212-591-2111. That's 212-591-2111. This is John Riley reporting for the Battle for Progressive Media.
You're right. You say too much, too loud, too long. You wanna steal the show, steal everything in sight. You would sing, but you have no song.